All right, Bothell City Council is back from break, and we are moving into our study session, which is AB 19-004, the study session on future development of downtown city-owned properties, and we have our Community Development Director to kick us off.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Actually, since Ms. Bajidas has been doing such a great job tonight, I was going to ask her to take on this. So thank you for your time tonight on this, this important topic. We're going to run through several slides on a presentation, and then we want to leave as much time as possible for the discussion of these items. So tonight we are talking about the 5 city-owned downtown properties. We may not get to all 5, but we will get through the critical ones at least, and we'll talk some more about what we're trying to accomplish. And I'll run through the purpose of tonight, give you an overview of the packet materials. Then Boyd is going to talk about the downtown vision status, the revitalization strategy, where we started with all of this and where we've come to date. And then, excuse me, Jeannie Ash is going to talk briefly about economics and introduce our consultant from Kidder Matthews, our broker, who's working on the sale of the properties, and he's got a presentation on some of the market factors to consider in this. And then we'll leave time for council discussion and direction, and I'll be trying to facilitate that discussion as best I can and help us get to a point where we can get some good direction from the council on how to move forward on these particular properties. So with that, our purpose tonight is really to talk about what are the economic objectives for the council for these properties. What are the land use objectives? And then how do the market factors play into that? So as the owner of these properties, the city really has a lot more ability to direct what can happen than we do through our regulatory process, but there are trade-offs with that, and those are the types of things that we're going to talk about this evening. So if you want to do something in particular on a site, you want to limit the uses that can go there, we want to know how strongly you feel about that, because that may mean that it takes longer to market the property, for example. So those are the types of things that we'd like to talk about and ultimately get some direction from the council on these particular parcels so that we can move forward, as this will affect the marketing, the sale, and the development. We are not asking for any specific action from the council this evening, however. So just to highlight what we're talking about, so we have the 5 properties. Tonight we're going to talk about primarily Block D first. We're going to talk about D and E, F, and G at the same time. D is the one that's closer to being available for development. E, F, and G is further off, but because of how close they are and how interrelated they are, what we talk about in one really affects the other and vice versa. So we'll talk about both, but the focus is really on D. The second one we're going to talk about is the Civic Center block. These are the parcels that are along Bothell Way as well as 183rd. These were the former hotel sites. So we're looking at, for direction from the council as to what type of development would you like to see there. We've got some questions as to how that relates to the area and what you want to see developed. The third one, if we have time, we'll get to Block A. This one's pretty straightforward, so we may not need as much time to talk about this, but we'll get to that one after the other 2 that we mentioned. And then finally, if time, there we are, we'll talk about P South, which again is further down the road in terms of when it would be available for development. So that's not as critical. If we don't get to that one this evening, that would be okay. So very quickly, an overview of the materials that are in your packet. What we tried to put together was just some good background information that would give you a head start on the discussion that we're looking for this evening. So first we have the map of the downtown area. You could see, go back to that. So this shows not only the city-owned parcels, but some of the development that's occurred already in the downtown. To help set the context for what we're talking about. When the plan was adopted almost 10 years ago now, we really didn't have the context. We had a vision, but we weren't sure exactly what it was going to look like. Now we have the development that's happening, so we're getting a better sense of what that's looking like and how it's all fitting together. So this is a chance to really refine the vision and take a look at how we want these 5 parcels to fit into that. So we have several discussion questions that are at the back of the packet. Those are what we're going to use to lead the discussion this evening, and we're going to talk about the economic considerations, the land use considerations, as well as the market factors and how all of those interplay and affect the direction that you might want to go with these. we also included in here some fact sheets about each of the parcels. So that talks about some of the zoning requirements that go along with that, gives you some background information on the sites. We've done some massing to show you what the minimum build-out of the sites could be relative to the maximum build-outs of those sites and relative to the other development in the downtown. And then just some examples, some images at the very bottom of the last page of each of those, just to kind of give a sense of the types of things that we might be talking about for those. And we have some other examples that we can use later as well. So we've done that for each of those properties. And then also, just one more. And then also a summary of the downtown revitalization strategy. And Dave's going to be talking about that in just a minute. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk about the downtown vision.
Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly review the downtown vision, the revitalization strategy that grew out of that vision, and then talk a little bit about some of the implementation and amendments that we've made to the plan since then to try to achieve that vision as we move forward. I'm going to focus to some degree on lots D and EFG, which are shown in this image here. And I would like to make a point about the vision. A lot of times we hear that this illustration is the vision. And in fact, that's just an artist's rendering of one potential build out of the downtown sub-area. It helped us visualize what could happen, but it wasn't meant to really be a template for what was going to happen here. So the adopted vision, I think, is best illustrated in this quote from the background vision in the plan, the vision statement in the plan, and that's to fully restore and heighten the vitality, character, and civic beauty of downtown, reviving and enhancing its iconic image and function as the real heart of the city. So that's really the vision. And then these illustrations, like this early plan view of how that might develop, are again to help people understand how this build out might occur. And one thing I wanted to point out on this plan view is that even in these early at this early conceptual phase, one of the opportunities that we saw was that with the realignment of 522 and the extension of Main Street, we would create for the first time some large parcels right on Main Street that would provide opportunities for anchor retail. And I think that's very important to consider as we consider particularly the fate of parcels D and EFG. This actually is a diagram that came even earlier. This is the real conceptual idea of what the strategy should be. It should be about consolidating the downtown business core along Main Street and the multi-way boulevard, about improving the connections to the campus and to the river. This is slightly different than what's in your packet, the part that's highlighted, but I did want to highlight that in this revitalization strategy, it specifically targets the large parcels west of Bothell Way and in particular parcels D and EFG as opportunities for that kind of anchor retail that would really support the Main Street and the retail on Main Street and on Bothell Way. And that was also reflected in the development regulations. This little diagram here shows one aspect of the development regulations that was really geared at these parcels, and those are what we call the anchor exceptions. So in the downtown core district, and to a little bit lesser degree in downtown neighborhood, we really envision lot line to lot line development. And the kinds of basic services that we need in a downtown to support a real livable community, like a grocery store, maybe don't fit. Our consultants weren't sure that Bothell was ready for the mixed-use development incorporating a grocery store, but they recognized the importance of having that opportunity. So these anchor exceptions were designed to allow for that kind of those kind of large retail uses and allows a little more flexibility in how they can be built out. So they still would require full frontage along Bothell Way, for example, but would allow surface parking and less than full coverage on the back sides of the parcels. So with that, as we've gone forward, we have encountered some challenges implementing the plan. Probably the most basic one was just establishing a new urban paradigm for what had been mostly developed as a suburban city. And that required a change of thinking on the part of staff, and especially in development review, that we were really packing a lot more into tighter spaces and had to think even harder about things like fire access and garbage access and how all of these pieces fit together in a small piece of ground. So that's been a learning curve, and also adjusting to a form-based code. Our code had evolved to have some aspects of form-based code, but the downtown plan was a whole new code that city staff and developers have had to learn to use. And as we have, we've encountered issues where some of the regulations didn't really seem to be getting us towards the vision that was outlined. So there have been, as you know, a series of amendments to the downtown plan to address those issues as we come upon them. To date, all of the amendments that we've made have been consistent with the planned action EIS. In other words, they were studied in terms of the environmental impacts. So we haven't had to go back and revisit that. And then the other thing that has come up as we've been marketing the properties is, as Mike said, we don't just have on those properties, don't just have to rely on the development regulations. We can apply other restrictions and conditions with the purchase and sale agreements. So I'll get into that a little bit more here shortly. So as an example, on Block D, this was our downtown plan consultant liked to refer to this as the 100% site. It's the largest of the city-owned parcels. It has great exposure to high volumes of traffic, so it makes it an ideal site for at least some kinds of retail that rely on that. And along with Block EFG, they are the best opportunities for anchor retail and the only opportunities directly on Main Street, on the Main Street extension. As you know, the previous purchase and sale agreement for this, for Block D, had a requirement for a specialty grocery, which was consistent with the vision and as an anchor. The code only lists a grocery as an allowed use, and so a requirement that it be a grocery of a minimum size would provide the option for a specialty grocer, or if somebody did come along and wanted to put a full-size grocery store, the code was designed to accommodate that. And then on the right here, the chart just summarizes some of the development standards, the development regulations that apply to this site. In the downtown core, we allow 6 floors and 76 feet in height. This is a split zone site, as is EFG, that steps down to downtown neighborhood in the southwest corner in this case, to 5 stories and 65 feet. The red star shows that there are special rules there, as I said, for retail, for anchor developments. And then the yellow star is down below in terms of parking. I just wanted to clarify that the maximum parking refers to maximum surface parking. So if a developer came along and wanted to build more than that in structured parking, we would not object. It's not likely to happen since that's very expensive, but that's the reason for a maximum parking requirement. And then, as Mike said, this includes both minimum and maximum build-out in terms of the massing study. And because of the anchor exceptions, Block D could build out just with the building that goes a certain depth, 20% of the depth, the east-west depth of the site along Bothell Way, along the multi-way boulevard. And that frontage is required to have pedestrian-oriented retail on it. If it were to be a grocery store or some other big box or medium box retail, that would probably require what's called liner retail along the multi-way boulevard. So smaller shops that would face the multi-way boulevard. The code doesn't actually require retail along the Main Street extension, but if that's something that council felt was important, that could be potentially be a condition of the purchase and sale agreement. And here again, in the regulations, this goes into more about the specific regulations regarding the frontages. And again, I've starred the provision for anchor retail there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeannie Ash and to talk about the economic development aspects.
So I actually only have a few comments with regards to the economic development aspect of this, and that is that the beautiful thing about this evening is that we get a chance to talk about the changes. There's been a lot of really great development that has happened, and a lot of moving pieces that has happened over the past decade, like the opening up of the city lot has made some changes. When we talk about the property, we're not only talking about how we're using the property and the value of the property, but keeping in mind that each property and each use type is going to generate a different type of revenue stream for the city. And as an example, while grocery stores would be an awesome amenity downtown, they do not create sales tax for the city. And if that's important to you, then there's just something you need to keep in mind. Also, too, we have a tourism strategy, and we're working to bring tourists to our community. Well, what type of amenities do we have to support them in addition to the hotels and our restaurants? And is there space for that too in this conversation, as well as a growing workforce, et cetera? So I just wanted to point out that there's a lot of factors to think about when you're talking about the use of your land, and to help us make those decisions, we've asked our real estate broker, Blair Howe, who is an expert in commercial real estate, to come and give you a presentation about the current and future conditions of the retail, office, and residential markets. Thank you. You have everything you need at the...
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me? Nice to be here this evening. What I thought I'd do is just start out with kind of a quick big picture about where the markets are today as we see them or as other people are seeing them, and then finish up with some high-level drill down about what's going on in the local marketplace here. So I'll be very basic, and I hope I'm not speaking over anybody's head here or my message is at the appropriate level. Don't hesitate to jump in if it's not. The first thing I want to point out is that real estate markets are cyclical, just as the rest of our economy is. And you used to be able to, and you still can to a certain degree, set your clock by the real estate market cycles. And I think it's useful just to understand where we are on a cyclical basis. At a national level, this graph here shows you where each product type is in our market cycle. So this cycle starts out at the recession level, and then as expansion takes place, rental rates increase, you get to the place where you're going to finally make projects feasible. Everybody rushes out and builds a lot of new product. At some point, either the economy changes a little bit or we just simply overbuild, and then the market corrects a little bit and we work back down into a recession, place where we're in a recession and the cycle starts over again. So here you can see where we are in the cycle by product type. So, and this is natural, usually apartments lead off and then office is at the tail end in terms of how it expands and when new product comes to the market. We can also look at this by product type, and this diagram here shows you where the Seattle market is for office space in the current cycle. So you can see that the number 8 there is roughly representative of where Seattle is. The office markets are still expanding. You're still seeing lots of new construction, and it's being absorbed quite well at this point. When you look at the apartment market, we have, by most measures, reached the peak, and you can see here where Seattle is there at number 12, where you're starting to see excess supply, which is taking a little bit of time to absorb, and so we're going through that process now and starting to understand what that really feels like. This is the same graph with looking at the retail markets, and you can see here that from a retail perspective, we're at the peak of the market. And I'll talk about what that means local here in a minute. Hotels are a little further. We're seeing some overbuilding and some backing off. Investors and developers are saying, okay, let's just take a minute and see if we adequately absorb the inventory we have and give time for occupancy rates to improve and revenues to improve before we build more product. At a local level, this is, I'm not going to get real deep here. I'm just going to speak in general terms to the Bothell Kenmore marketplace. And what we've done is taken a look at the inventory of buildings that are 2000 and newer, so built since 2000. And what I like to do is look at the numbers and then kind of think about what they mean to me. And they may mean a little different to other people. But we have 1.5 million square feet of inventory of these newer buildings in the Bothell Kenmore market. And these markets are characterized by the way that data collectors collect the information, not necessarily the way we'd all like to see them. But this gives us a good perspective of what's happening in the area here. Of that 1.5 million square feet, 5% of it's vacant. Which is considered just about equilibrium. Markets are in equilibrium at 5% or 95% occupancy. Our vacancy's lower than it's been over the last 5 years, which is a good thing. Rental rates have been increasing as a result. We average $29 a square foot, almost $30 a square foot gross for office rents. To provide some perspective, to make new office development feasible, we need to see rates that are maybe as much as $10 a square foot higher in order to attract new development to office buildings. Because the market's expanding, we're absorbing space pretty fast. We've absorbed almost 100,000 square feet of space in the last 12 months. And then the other factor that we always look at is what's going on with parking in the marketplace in general. We're parked in this market on average at 3.7 spaces per 1,000 square feet. That's a lot of parking. That's consistent with what you would see in most suburban markets. And the reason it's particularly interesting for all of us tonight is that there is a tension between wanting development in an urban environment with low parking ratios and then what's out in the market that you have to compete with. So you've got to there's a balancing act that goes on there. The statistics here are from the same market area, newer buildings, 2,000 and newer. The inventory shows 4,500 units, of apartment units. Of those, we currently have 8% that are vacant, which is pretty consistent with a long-term condition. The interesting thing about vacancy in apartments is you've also got to take into consideration concessions that are given, free rent or others. And here we have 2.9% in concessions, which has moved up recently, consistent with the region as a whole. And so you really have to add that percentage to the vacancy. So we're starting to get to 10%, give or take a little bit. And that's some excess supply. The interesting thing about that is it's probably a reflection of having delivered a whole bunch of units all at once. And so we're still gobbling up that inventory. And so as that happens, we'll continue to see some higher vacancy numbers, but at some point it should drop off. And to that point, here in the last 12 months, we've absorbed 400 new units, which is a pretty big number, 10% of the inventory, total inventory. Our parking ratio here, with the same dynamic that I talked about before, suburban versus urban, we're at 1.4 spaces per unit, which is something to keep in mind as you're thinking about planning. Where is this really going to go in the future? No one has a crystal ball, but you can say some things based on what's happened in the past. Really, though, how well we move through whatever pause or recession or slowdown that we might be having is really a function of population and employment growth. And for us, that's all about tech, and it's all about Amazon. And as long as we have the growth in that arena, we're going to be doing much better than the nation as a whole. When we're looking at the retail market, same area again here, newer space, all product types though. We have about 1 million square feet of inventory. 2% of that is vacant, which is virtually no vacancy. It's a very, very low number. And you can see that it's much lower than the 5-year average. And we're seeing some rental rate increases because of that. Having said that, our average rate of $25 triple net is still below what it takes to build certain kinds of retail. So we would need to see some, for instance, if you want retail in the base of a mixed-use project like we have here in downtown, in order to justify that construction cost and to make that portion of the building feasible so the developer doesn't have to subsidize it in some other way, you would need a rent maybe $10 a square foot higher to make that happen. We're absorbing a little bit of space, not a lot, but some. The important thing, or the thing I think that is really important to keep in mind when you're thinking about retail, is the big picture, and that is retail in America. And everyone sees store closings and the news about how retail is changing. It is changing. We're going through a systematic downscaling. If you compare the amount of square footage that exists, say, in Europe per person, they're at about half the amount of retail space that we have in this country. And we are systematically reducing the amount of space. Having said that, there are certain pockets where we're still seeing growth, and the Seattle area is one of those. So that's a good thing. Here we have the same dynamic in terms of parking. We all want to drive right up in front and park in front of our retail space, and that's what's happening in a lot of our marketplace. And when we go to the dense urban version, we naturally go to fewer cars, and we want it all to be walkable. The only reason I say that is there's a tension again between when I go make my shopping decision, where will I go? Will I drive up to the store that's a little further away, or will I walk a little distance? And so there's that tension that's worth understanding or keeping in mind. The other thing I'll say is that you were looking at the vision pictures of retail and talking about grocery here. With the rental, the market where it is and the level of rental rates being where they are, and the fact that for quite some time apartment projects have driven land values up, you may find yourself in a position where if you want a grocery, which is a perfectly great thing to want, you may say, I want that, and what I would say is that they're associated with that is probably you receive less revenue, and just because the grocers can't afford to pay as much, and that translates right down to your land value. So just kind of to wrap things up a little bit, we're seeing at this point in the market cycle, you naturally see more uncertainty. And I would suggest that the best way to go into that environment is by moderating our expectations and retaining as much flexibility as possible. That's really all I have to say right now. It was a modest presentation, and I hope it helps provide some perspective. Questions or?
So that really wraps up the presentation of information that we wanted to provide you. We're ready at this point to start into the discussion questions, unless you have any particular questions you want to ask about the information that we've presented so far.
Can I talk? I know it's kind of a crystal ball thing, but it does seem like we do have a grocer in downtown Bothell, the QFC there, and it's been the exact same since I was a little kid in the 80s, probably the 70s. I don't know, Rosemary, you probably know how long that grocer's been there. Other was, but the current QFC, that thing is just seems to be so ripe for redevelopment and having a grocer there. Do we know if there's any talk about looking at that whole complex there, and is the zoning ripe enough for somebody to actually, to entice them to redevelop it?
I haven't heard of anything that's come through our department as far as, pre-application meetings or inquiries on that. The zoning on the property is that the general commercial?
Yeah, it's general downtown corridor, but it does have the neighborhood center overlay, so it allows the types of retail uses that are there and would allow for redevelopment. The only whispering of redevelopment, I guess, that I've heard in the last 13, 14 years is there is a parking lot south of the QFC building, and early in our downtown planning process, they proposed to add another retail building there, more strip retail, and they didn't go forward with that. But for whatever reason, I'm not entirely sure why, but we haven't. I haven't heard of any talk of redevelopment. It's something that we see as probably a more distant possibility if downtown redevelopment continues to be successful, that there will potentially be some pressure to redevelop that center.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, we can reach out to the local rep for Kroger and ask them.
I don't know if Kroger owns it. It's
Yes, they
that
do.
whole shopping center?
Yes,
Wow.
Kroger owns QFC.
Right, I mean,
So-
that whole
No, but we can
lot.
certainly reach out to the owners and to the grocery store and ask them what their plans are.
And Rite Aid across the street too, that whole thing. I mean, that's been there for ever.
And I think that represents the traditional suburban auto-oriented type of development along the highway. So I think, yeah, the question is, when would we see that become more urban, like the rest of the downtown sub-area?
Yeah, I'm just thinking for the grocer question, like that seems to be a great place for, that's where I get my groceries. And I don't know if they're continuing to, if they would continue to be there, and if there's something we could do to encourage them to maybe consider redeveloping that whole thing, that'd be huge. I had one other quick question about grocers, and it seems to be popular. I'm going to try it soon, to actually order your groceries online and like go pick them up or have them delivered to you. Is there any kind of analysis of that like is it trying to make a grocer happen in 2007? We're in 2019. Does it make any sense to do that, because our grocer is actually going to be something that you don't go to a grocery store anymore in the future?
I don't know if we have enough information on that yet. I think it's a relatively new phenomenon in the grocery industry. I think some of them have actually backed away from it, and now they've gone back to it. So I think we're still waiting to see how that plays out. But certainly if we get an application in for a grocery store, that's one of the things that they would talk to us about, is what are their needs and you know, in terms of delivery areas and pickup areas, or, you know, and how big of a footprint they might need as a result of that. They become more of a warehouse type of use as opposed to a retail use with walk-in traffic.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from council? Deputy Mayor?
I have a list. I'm trying to figure out how to tackle it. Actually, that presentation made it harder, I think, for me to wrap my mind around the direction. And so I guess after hearing it, I feel like probably I would be more in favor of flexibility, since we don't know. I mean, it sounds like maybe office is the most likely use. I guess what I'm wondering is if we were to incentivize, I guess, having a grocer or some sort of retail on Lot D, would it become more attractive if we were to add a story? Is that something that would make it more palatable for someone that maybe wanted to develop that parcel? So that's one question I have. I don't expect you to have all the answers, but these are,
That's
this is my
one
stream
of the
of
things we want to talk
consciousness.
about tonight when we get into the discussion questions, so it's a good question.
So that was one question. In general, I feel like my biggest concerns when it comes to Block D are the fact that how often does a city have an opportunity to create their front door? And so in terms of priorities, I can't emphasize enough what an opportunity is to present that front door and entice someone to turn left or right when they're on 522. And so that's where my mind goes. This is like an architect's dream. And I can imagine, I mean, it'd be a design project in college. It's that exciting and has so much potential and so many, I guess, different opportunities. So I guess where I'm going is I would like to know, kind of have a better sense of what our design guidelines are and if they're appropriate given that opportunity to have a real entrance to downtown Bothell. And I don't really have a good sense of that. At the same time, I'm curious, I guess I'm reacting to the retail conversation. So I think everyone, when they think about downtown Bothell and what they hope for, is walkability and interest along the streetscape and things to do in an activated street. And I guess I'm concerned how we can incentivize or have that happen. And maybe it's, maybe we can't control everything, but could we give it a good enough shot that it has a real potential for happening? Even if one developer were to buy that whole lot, which I assume they would, can we that picture on the right, I think, is a perfect example of what, the human scale that's so attractive to people and makes them want to engage and walk around. I know we have regulations for how far or the length of a building before it has to be broken up, but is there a way to maybe do even more? Because I guess when I look at the Junction and Six Oaks, they've done a good job, but it still looks like one monolithic building, more or less. And so I'm sorry, I'm like probably rambling, but those are the kinds of questions that I have in terms of what can we do with this really tremendous opportunity. And let me see what other. And then I wanted to ask staff, are there any staff suggestions concerning these blocks? If you go back to, so actually that picture's perfect. Does staff have recommendations? Do we still believe that it should be broken up into a downtown corridor versus whatever the DN stands for?
Downtown neighborhood.
Or at this point, do we think it's all in one block? Should it be one designation? I guess that's a question that I have.
That's a question we have for you as well.
Okay. I personally I'd like to know the pros and cons. I assume as far as land value, that one designation would make it more valuable. And then the other question I had was owning both, and this kind of goes back to the gateway concept, but owning both D and E, F, and G, if they're bought by two different entities, which is probably the most likely scenario, what can we do to make sure that they have a relationship and they speak to each other in a visual and aesthetic way? So that's kind of stream of consciousness. Thank you for indulging me.
All good questions and comments, and that really leads us into the discussion of the questions that we have in the packet for you. So if we want to go in to that part of the discussion now, I think that would be helpful to continue that.
Sure, thanks.
So if you go to pages 75 and 76 of the packet, that has the discussion questions that we've laid out. And we kind of want to take these a little bit in order, particularly the first ones on the economics of it, because one of the things that's really going to drive the marketability of these is, and the types of restrictions or additional design requirements or allowing for more flexibility, all of that plays into the value of the property as we put it on the market. And those are some of the trade-offs that I was talking about. So in the first question, what we've laid out, let me go back to my questions here. So it's really about the priority on the return on the public investment. And so what we're asking from the council, and this is an iterative process, so understand you may have a certain feeling about which one you prefer right now. As we get into the discussion about those trade-offs, that may change, and that's what this discussion is about. So is the main objective of the council, and we'll talk just about Block D now, to really maximize the sales price of that, in which case greater flexibility, less restrictions, less requirements on the design or the gateway features, the types of uses that we put in there. That's going to maximize the sale price because we're leaving it up to the market and we're going to get presumably the best offer that way. Do you want to maximize the public benefits from that? Some things we've talked about in the past is putting a stipulation in there for if it's a mixed-use development that includes residential, that affordable housing is a part of that. Are you looking for some additional public uses, public space that would be a part of that development on that block? Again, that's going to affect the sales price in terms of what we're able to ask for that and what we might get in return. Or do you want to maximize tax revenues over time? And this gets back to Jeannie's point about certain types of uses may not generate a lot of sales tax over the long run. If it's purely office, that's going to have a different revenue stream than if we're getting different types of retail in there. If we wanted really high-end sales tax return, we'd be looking at putting an auto dealership there. I don't think that's where we want to go. I don't think the council's already made that decision. But those are the types of trade-offs that we want to talk about. So And then related to that are particular desired outcomes, like Deputy Mayor Dewar was just talking about. Are there certain things that you want to see in that? And again, that's going to affect the marketability and the sales price. So we'll talk about some of the land use stuff, but just maybe your initial thoughts on what your priorities are. Do you want to maximize the sales price, the public benefits, or the tax returns over time, or some combination of those?
Can I weigh in with just
Please.
thinking, what jumps to my brain? It's such a big chunk of property that I think it has potential for maximizing the economic, of all the properties, probably maximizing its economic purchase power for whoever buys that property. I am not committed to requiring a grocery store there, because I think a grocery store could go somewhere else within the city properties. But I do like the idea of being a head turner. And one idea that I have thought might be a component would be, if maybe not requiring open space, but could we require, like what you're seeing along in the new development along the South Lake Union, a really nice piece of art, big piece of art, sculpture that's sitting there to grab an eye and turn heads. I would like to see something that breaks up the monotony of apartments that are the same kind of apartments that have been existing. So if we do multifamily, I'm sitting there thinking, it's a big chunk of property that can go pretty tall. It might be worth considering, seeing how everybody else feels, putting affordable housing component in that, if that were to happen, if someone wanted to do a mixed use. But maybe someone wants to come in and put in, a big office building, which we do not have in downtown Bothell. We have no office buildings aside from medical that I can think of. So, then affordable housing isn't part of that discussion, maybe. But that's where I'm landing on that, is give ourselves more flexibility with this piece of property. Don't put affordable housing out of it, but do something, ask for something that's a head turner, that's not part of that Bothell does not have already, that invites people to move in off of 522.
Okay.
Well, I agree with Jean on a number of issues. I would like to see some, if we have a mixed use, I'd like to see some variation of affordable housing in there. I'd also agree with the deputy mayor that I think a higher quality design that will attract people to come into our city is something that we really need to look at in Lot D.
So one question I would put back to the council, if you're looking for something like affordable housing as part of a mixed-use residential component, would you consider increasing the height limit for that area to grant them additional height for those affordable units?
I can't speak for the rest of the council, but absolutely.
So I'll go. I'd be okay with additional height for Lot D. To me, though, commercial, or I'm sorry, office, an office building, I think would be a good use of it. The other thing I just feel like we're missing is just like the big anchor, just like in like Woodinville, for example. They've got the Target and the movie theater, and really, I go shop there and use that area. And it just seems to me we're really missing the thing that can really draw people in to the downtown and make them stop here instead of going to Woodinville. And I'd like to see that. And it seems like Lot D might be the place to do such a thing. I guess I'm not too worried about the maximizing public benefit. I personally would either like to see us get a really good sale price or something that provides quite a bit of tax revenue over time. Obviously, tax revenue over time would be, I prefer that probably if I had to choose between the two. But yeah, I'm not really bent that it has to be a grocery store there at all. I don't think that's an anchor that would really draw people over to stop in Bothell. So there's grocery stores everywhere. Is that good? Is there any other?
It's all good.
All right.
So if one of the things that Dave talked about in his presentation is that we have a provision for, if it's an anchor use, then they can do basically a single story with surface parking. Is that something that you want to continue to allow? Or since you've talked about this being the gateway or the head turner, I like that term. That's much more descriptive than gateway. Do you want to allow that, or do you want to see something that's a bigger structure, basically, that takes more advantage of the building envelope that's allowed?
I'll go. I would prefer, if we're going to have height anywhere, it certainly seems that that would be the location, because it's less impactful to people's views. It's right off a transit corridor. And so, yeah, I would prefer for it to be really well used. Hopefully they could do both. The Target in Seattle has housing above it, so I think it's possible. I'll just weigh in. I prefer long-term sales tax revenue or a revenue of some sort to purchase price. And obviously, I've already spoken about the trade-offs of design control, a little bit more design control. And I concur about the affordable housing. Happy to go up another height if it gets us some affordable housing for workforce. So I think, did I answer all the questions at this point?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think very similar that the long-term revenue is very important versus the sale price. That one-time sales price, comes and goes, but the revenue, we have the structural deficit, so anything that can help with that would be great. The affordable housing for an extra story would be a good trade-off, accomplish some of our goals. And I think we should look at having some level of control over it, also offsetting the maximum sales price. So I think that trade-off is the proper way to go.
Thank you.
Well, I really agree with much of what's been said. I think it's really important that we go back to the vision of what we've always wanted to see in Bothell, and that's a place where people can work and live and have some recreation as well, and a walkable community. So we need office. We need a place for people to actually work. We have very little office space. Does that bring us long-term maximum tax revenue, the office space? Is that something that we consider when we talk about that?
There's a multiplier effect. There's a multiplier effect that happens when you build an office building of any size. There'll be employees coming to downtown who will need more services. They'll use our parks and quite possibly move here also.
And I also believe that when you have your office space below, you would have like a deli or a retail or something that complements the community itself
Yes.
as well. I'm not really in favor of big box stores. I think the heart of Main Street, the heart of our town is Main Street, and keeping small retailers and restaurants and an active place is really critically important. So that's why I'm a little concerned when we talk about large box. So I guess I just pretty much say I'd like to see us make sure that we have the office. I think we're doing really well in the apartments, and I think we've kind of reached the max in apartments, not just here, but also in Seattle, where we're seeing that the rents are going down. They're trying to attract people. They're not filling up like they should be at this point. So I would be as open to all kinds of multiple uses as we could possibly do. Now, we did hire an economic development person, and I haven't heard recommendations from you. Or what your thoughts are.
Again, I agree that I don't believe a grocery store on that corner would be a good use of that property. And I also agree that having some sort of gateway to the community and wayfinding for our Main Street would be important. And also, too, I think that long-term, that an office, primarily because the market supports it, and when you read the daily tech portion of the newspaper, it's not just Amazon that's growing, it's Facebook, it's Google. And then when you look at Microsoft, they're tearing down their campus and building a whole new campus. Technology is not going away, it's going to continue to grow, and you know, just the conversation about the 5G, for example, that you had earlier this evening. It's not going away, and I think we can really support an office building.
I just want to double dip real quick and back up the deputy mayor, that if there's something we could do to make E, F, and G and D, at least on the side that they're facing each other, match, so that actually does give that gateway feel, that would be good. I don't know how we do that in code, but I mean, maybe one goes first and then we just tell the other guy to do the same way. I don't know, but it's just that did ring a bell to me. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, and we have that ability probably better through the development agreement and the purchase and sale agreement. And we could do it through regulation, but I think it's probably going to be a little cleaner to do it through the development agreements, because we can put that on both sites.
Not to storytell, but Tom and I were here when there was some big glass, really expensive, was a $150,000 thing that went on each side of the road, and one of them didn't want to do it, and I think that, yeah, so stuff like that, like some big fancy jewel or something that matches on each side of the road isn't really what I'm having in mind. I just architecturally, like, at least it looks like there's two sides to the same thing.
Yeah. So, Dave, maybe you could talk just a little bit about what the current design standards are and how they apply to those two sites.
So the development regulations would require ground floor retail on both of those. So the street level would be retail. Just on Bothell Way. Well, on EFG, it would extend along the Main Street portion of EF and G. The regs do require kind of a fine-grained window door succession along those facades, and that applies to the new development that's happened to date as well. But that could be reinforced, perhaps, to some degree. The height allowed is the same, although, again, if there was if a development took advantage of the anchor exception, that would be a lower height. So so if it happened on both sides, they would match to that degree, but the code itself doesn't guarantee that. And the code does have other requirements for articulating a base and a top and having horizontal articulation to help break up the mass. But that's always a bit of an issue with developer, how far we can push towards that, given the requirements. There's requirements within the regulations and guidelines, and so we can hold developers to the requirements, but the guidelines, that's where the regulations provide for some flexibility, but also give us less direct control, and again, where conditions of the sale could add some level of control.
Can I just ask what the requirements are in terms of material? Because the last thing I think we want is a flimsy-looking gateway. It's not much of a head turner. And I think the idea of stability and the continuity of the brick from Main Street, to me, would seem kind of important, but I'm not sure exactly what the requirements are.
The requirements require quality materials, but not necessarily brick. But brick is one of the preferred or allowed base materials. But and we've seen that on Boulevard Place, Six Oaks, the Junction, all have used brick to some degree on their base. It's not absolutely required, by the code. But
I think, and I love the creativity that we're already seeing along Bothell Way. When you look at the buildings that have just been built currently, and you see where Amaro is, and then the restaurant across the street, which is the Mexican restaurant, and then steakhouse, and above that where you have the apartments, they've done a really nice job, I think, of, kind of making a welcoming community along that strip for Bothell Way, and I think that we can have some faith in the fact that people are going to want to continue to add to the aesthetics of downtown Bothell as they develop their, what they're going to bring to us. So I have a little confidence, I think, in the builders themselves to really do a nice design, something that will be welcoming. I hope. It's been, so far, I think we've done very well along our boulevard.
I think it would be helpful if you had some sense of what's your vision, and maybe this is one of the follow-up items, but I've sort of heard, yes, we're happy with what's happened along the boulevard, and then I've heard others say, I don't want it to look like what we've already built. And we've had some feedback with some of the buildings that have already been built. What is it? Is there a building you know of that is really appealing that you've seen somewhere? Sort of what is it that maybe could help us? Because yes, builders are certainly interested in creative buildings, but I think that we have to be the stronger party and that we will have to lay those things out for them. And again, it will change the value of the property. So the more regulations you put in place and the more things that you're looking for, more of those quality aspects, more brick, more architecture, more setbacks, more undulations, that has an impact on the property, but that may very well be worthwhile. And that's the balancing that we're looking at. So is there something that really resonates with you that would give us a better idea?
I think, and I'm putting words in your mouth, so forgive me, but I think we're on the same page, is that what we feel Bothell has tilted away from is its timeless look. So, for example, when you go into communities that have been around for a long time, like Wenatchee or Auburn, or even Monroe, and you go down those old main streets and you look at these buildings that are, some of them are 2, 3, 4 stories tall, taller than what we have here in Bothell. They're older buildings, but they have a timeless aspect to them, and I think that's what when we talk about treatments to the buildings, is what can we do in this new construction that gives it that timeless feel for it, so that 30 years, 20 years down the road, people don't look at that and go, oh, that's so early, 21st century. I think that's what we're looking for as far as aesthetics. Does that?
So something that evokes more of and I'm using the word evoke intentionally, traditional Main Street look to it.
Absolutely.
So there are different materials that can go into that. There are different styles that can go into that. But generally, we're talking about, early 20th century
Classic.
classic.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think we've just invented a new architectural style.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, again, but I'm not criticizing what's happening on 527. I'm merely trying to point out that these parcels are different and that standard should be higher. That's all I'm trying to say. Because these are really, really special parcels, and I don't want to lose that opportunity that we have. That's all.
And I think that's a great point. And so they aren't. So currently, these parcels are not different. And so that's the question, is if you want something that's different from what's already been built, we need a better sense of what that is.
Yeah. So I think we can come back with maybe some different examples. There's a technique that was used several years ago. I'm not sure if it's been used recently, but it's a visual preference survey. So we can put together a series of slides of all different types of buildings and just kind of get your gut reaction to them and see what you like and what you don't like. Because bottom line, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So what looks good to one person is not necessarily going to look attractive to someone else. But I think we all have in our own minds what we think is going to be good design. So we can work on putting something like that together. I think that might be helpful, maybe at a future study session. And then we can talk about whether that's incorporated into a development agreement, or do we amend the code and apply that in a different way.
I think if you're going to do that, though, I would also want to know how developers would feel about actually saying we're going back to the classic, going back to that kind of older look. I'm really concerned about one of the buildings that was built because they were trying to keep the vision of Main Street, and I really don't think it turned out to be what it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
And I've lived in Bothell for 55 years. I've seen Main Street, and I've seen it grow and change, and it's a classic. It's the heart of the city. I don't think we have to repeat that someplace else. Let's let them be the heart of the city.
Mm-hmm.
But the new buildings, I mean, I believe it's in the eye of the beholder. I like those new buildings. I think they're very attractive. I drive down through Kirkland and see all of their new buildings going along their marketplace, their new development there. I'm pretty happy with seeing things that people can create. And so I don't want to like focus on one thing and not allow that creativity to come forward.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to have a vision of something, I think we ought to have a vision that kind of talks about allowing the developers to show how they also have created buildings that we might be interested in.
Mm-hmm. And I think what we're talking about would be, it's really, I think, setting the parameters. It's not dictating a specific style or architectural design. It's really setting some parameters, but as Jennifer was saying, being clear about what those parameters are so that the architect, the designer, has a better understanding of that, and they can come up, they have some creativity within those boundaries that we're setting. And again, I get back to the word evoke. You know, it doesn't have to match exactly what the other buildings look like, but I think there are ways to design buildings that are very modern, but they reflect the architectural features of the buildings that are around it. So it blends in a little bit better. And in this case, we're also talking about some aspects of that would create that gateway feature. As Councilmember Zorn said, I think, you know, the head turner that says, hey, I want to see what's down this street. Something caught my eye, so I want to turn here and see what else is down the street. To me, that's what a good gateway will do. It draws people in.
So I'm going to pile on real quick with Councilmember McAuliffe. I like the looks of the new buildings. I don't really have any. The only thing that I mean, if I lived in there, I would actually want a balcony instead of that railing when you open your sliding door. But, you know, that's just me. But maybe people don't appreciate being able to go outside when you're on the 4th floor. But I certainly would love to have a balcony if I was in those buildings. The thing to me, though, for the remaining lots is that we don't, if we build a whole bunch of more little retail shops that at $30 per, I think it was
35, I think is what.
Was it 35 is what the kind of the sweet spot is, and we're at 25. And we're hearing a lot from the businesses now, like, we can't afford to be here anymore, so we're out. We're going to go open our shop somewhere else. I don't see a future in that. I really don't see a future in small retail. And they're trying to preserve Main Street. I think that's a good thing, but try to require that to build more and more. I've always been concerned about the Safeway that was put in that has that high expensive small retail strips there, and they've been vacant ever since that thing's been open. And I would hate to see that along our boulevard. So that's why I would lean more towards, like, let's build an office, or let's build something that would actually get people down here and use the restaurants we have now to keep them alive and healthy. We just don't have the supply of daytime population, I think, downtown that we could really benefit from, at least the retail that's here now. Eat that or some sort of anchor. And I know you don't agree with me, that's okay. But like, I just really feel like some sort of thing that makes people go like, oh, I need to go to, I don't know, Target or whatever, Home Depot, and there's one there, and then they come here, and then let's go eat and that type of thing. So that's what I see as a good use of that land to increase our tax revenue or to increase our revenues too in the future and just make it survivable. I don't see us having a bunch of very expensive boutiques along the boulevard that are going to survive. We don't have that type of people in this community. For a long, long time, it was all really blue collar worker type, Boeing employees, that type of people. And yeah, maybe we have some more kind of higher affluent people, but we don't have enough to really support a store that has to sell stuff that's expensive enough for $35 a square foot or whatever it was. And we need to extend the meeting. Can
I
everybody
move that we extend the meeting till 10 o'clock.
Second.
It's
Second.
moved by Councilmember Agnew, seconded by somebody over there, Councilmember McAuliffe, to extend the meeting until 10 o'clock. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
So I just have to spin off of where you were, because I thought it was really important of what you just said, Mayor. I believe we have to look at our population. And what is our population today? Our population today is our university and our college students and the people that we are seeing coming into those apartments around our university. That really is what kind of built this town, was to bring in the University of Washington. And then you started to see people coming to this town. Also, our tech corridor. What do the people want that actually are working in that tech corridor? Do they want some more office spaces? As I think they probably would like to be more downtown as well. But I think we've changed, and we need to respond to the people that are living here and going to school here and working here. I think what you said was important.
Not only have we changed, but society's changed. I mean, brick and mortar stores are going by the wayside. My daughter-in-law, she just orders her groceries at Fred Meyer because she has 4 kids and pulls up their car and they put them in and she drives away. But the one thing that, if we're going to put in office spaces, and that's fine, but then we need to be able to assist them and have restaurants and more businesses that they can come and use. And I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, we can talk about the architectural design, and we all want it to be a head turner. We all want it to be, people drive by and go, wow, that looks pretty cool. Hey, let's swing by there. I don't know what's going to be there in 10 years. I mean, I don't, and I don't think anybody here does. But, restaurants will be there in 10 years. I know that.
Please.
I think you had alluded to tourism. And so, I mean, I'm stuck on movie theaters. I mean, we have a small one here, but what other things can go in that would qualify as tourism?
So the reason why I brought it up is that we do have a tourism strategy, and the campaign is to have people stay here and launch their experience from Bothell. And we have the restaurants, but candidly, when I think about what do tourists want is they want to eat and drink and, go get coffee and have a place to sleep. There's also, in my opinion, a little opportunity for maybe some destination shopping. And the only example I can think of is what you had at the Country Village, something similar to that. Now, with that said, I would like to point out that we also too are working on, as the city grows, we're creating more events, and where people are coming from outside the community or will want to come from outside the community to experience our events. Those are the opportunities too. It doesn't necessarily have to be retail, although I would love to have a really fancy high-end boutique here. I don't think it will work, but perhaps just programming with regards to special events.
So we've touched on different types of uses, and I've heard some that say no big box, others saying big box might be okay. Are there some specific uses that, we talked about grocery stores earlier, and what I heard was that's not necessarily a requirement. Be nice, but that wouldn't be a stipulation. So are there particular uses that you would want to see in this block, whether it's an anchor or a non-anchor, or particular uses you would not want to see in this block? Because right now it's pretty open.
No more storage.
We don't allow that
We
now.
we can't house people. We don't need to house their stuff. I'm pretty open. Other than that, I could go either way on the anchor. If it's multi-story with an anchor on the bottom, that works. I'm less excited if it's just a one-story anchor, because it doesn't seem like the highest and best use. But I agree. I was thinking movie theater too, because somehow McMenamins doesn't come to mind when I want to go to a movie, unless I want to, go for the whole 150, bring the family to have dinner while I'm watching a movie. But it would be nice to have other opportunities for entertainment. I can't think of what those are off the top of my head, but anyway, the public storage was the only one I could think of that
Okay. I think
that
we're
and
covered
that
on
and
that one.
bikini baristas. No, thanks.
Yeah, I just want to interrupt you real quick.
Please.
Because movie theaters keep coming up. And one of the things about movie theaters is that they only have they're used at night, and then you have empty parking space. And I'd like to ask Blair, what's the economic viability of building a movie theater
Can you go up to the mic?
on Lot D?
I'm not sure I need to get up here because I don't know the answer.
We still need that on the record.
Make it up.
No, I do not know. It's something we could look into and figure out, and our retail people would have a good sense for it. But it's a thing where you need to really understand the financial implications and the competitive environment.
So let me pose the question a little bit differently, Blair, if I could. Have there been many new movie theaters built in the region in the last 10 years? So I'm trying to think of the ones that I know about, and I can't
Yeah,
come up
there
with
have
any.
been some,
Okay.
yeah. But it's a unique product that requires the knowledge and expertise of somebody who just does that to weigh in on whether it's a viable thing here. There are some things I can say about it. It's an incredible shared parking situation. So you have something going on at night, you can do something else with that parking during the day. And it does draw people from outside your area. So there are a lot of good things that can come from that. Whether or not it'll work here, I can't say.
I can add that our former economic development manager was very keen on theater on that site, and did a lot of groundwork exploring whether that was possible, and trying to attract movie theater developers, and was not successful. It's certainly something that we can take another look at, see if the business has transformed. And but at the time, there were really two options: either the sort of the specialized small-scale movie theater, and was a very difficult thing to make happen, or the multiplex, and they were very demanding in terms of, they basically wanted the city to build the parking for them, and then they would come.
Scratch the movie theater.
But again, that was several years ago, so.
I do think there is a better site for a movie theater, though, if you really think about where they go, rather than to be the entrance into your city. I think that probably doesn't feel really very well. But I'd like to look at what we see other cities doing that are, like, we see Redmond's Cultures Winery, and we see that we have some breweries and small wineries here, nothing very large. But is there something, tourist-wise, cultural-wise, that we might want to attract? I mean, we talk about not wanting to see too much retail because they struggle. They struggle, the small retail stores do. But maybe there's something we want to try and attract that will be more Bothell's kind of image.
I know that you've had conversations about farmers markets, and there's also I've heard a lot of conversations about folks wanting the artisan shops, the small cheese makers or wood makers, et cetera. So here's what I think, is that if you were to create a robust farmer's market that is kind of best of class, and people coming in, and you start inviting in those artisan cheesemakers, et cetera, these things grow organically. And you get people coming in, using them, folks are doing good business here, and then they grow into bricks and mortar.
You're talking about that could also blend into little pop-up shops, like, what is it, that U Village has some little pop-up shop destination
I love
area?
pop-ups. And yes, but with that said, I mean, there are seasonal farmers markets, and there are farmers markets that are year-round. And they, again, there's some really bad ones out there, and there's some really great ones. They take work and time, but if those are tourism opportunities. And
that wouldn't necessarily have to go on D.
right, it doesn't have to go on D.
Yeah.
And then, when you think about tourism opportunities, I always look at what our existing amenities are, and I know this is off topic, but what are our existing amenities, and how can we monetize them? And, maybe it's signage from the trail here, the bicycle trail, pointing people downtown to stop in, and because cyclists like to do two things. They like to drink coffee and they like to drink beer. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah.
Oh, the cycling part.
Yes. So thank you for that, bringing us back on topic then. No, that's okay. So we've actually gone through quite a few of our questions and had some good discussion about that. Just a couple others that are remaining, and one that the deputy mayor brought up earlier about the split zoning on the parcel. In terms of the uses, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, there's not a whole lot of difference in terms of the uses that are allowed in those two zones. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I also wanted to clarify one thing. So the map in the upper left shows a fairly large downtown neighborhood section, but it's really a split zone parcel. That's how it shows on the map. But the zoning allows requires downtown core development for a 70-foot depth from Bothell Way and Main Street, and only requires 60 feet of depth of downtown neighborhood. So the massing diagram in the upper right shows what actually could be done. And so it's just a way of having that building step down towards the downtown neighborhood zoning across, in this case, across 98th. So that, just to clarify what the actual requirement is. But yeah, the uses are quite similar. Originally, pedestrian-oriented retail was only allowed in downtown neighborhood if it was a continuous, connected continuously to the downtown, to retail in the downtown core. But we realized that was somewhat unworkable, so it is now allowed outright. One of the biggest differences is in downtown core, since it envisions lot line to lot line development, there's no public open space requirement. So the developments we have had that have split zoning have really maximized their downtown core and minimized the downtown neighborhood portion of the development.
Which is what we assume in the one on the right.
Yeah, in the massing, that's what the massing diagram assumes.
So my sense is that's probably not a significant issue in terms of how it would affect the marketability of the property. If it does become an issue, we can address that through a code change, for example, if we have to. But to keep us moving forward, so one of the other questions that we had about the market factors in particular, based on everything we've talked about so far, and this has been very, very helpful, very good direction for us. If some of the things that we've talked about, like the design standards, for example, are not, they're not well received by the marketplace, and we're not seeing a lot of interest for that reason, or maybe for some other reasons, some things that we've stipulated. Do you have a sense of how long you would want to go, or if the market just gets soft in a particular type of use? Say the market gets soft in the residential, and we're not getting a lot of interest. How long would you want to go before we revisit this? Do you have just a general sense of that? Understanding how important the sale is to our budget.
It's not marketable till the fall of 2019? Is that, I thought I read
For
that in
D,
here.
that's
For
correct,
D,
yeah. We're looking at, I think that's still correct, isn't it, Aaron? Looking at,
So it probably wouldn't hurt just to revisit. I mean, we did that every single council retreat for the last 7 years I've been at council retreats. So I would say that would be appropriate time on an annual basis, just to check in. I mean, if it's not getting interest, it's not getting interest, so.
well, and one of the questions at that point would be, the reason I bring it up is what are you willing to compromise on at that point, in order to maybe increase the likelihood of a sale? So that's just something to think about. No, so you don't have to answer that question this evening, but those are the types of things that we're going to have to talk about later on if we're not getting the type of interest that we would like to see on that property, and based on the direction we're getting. Okay.
I did want to pile on with the deputy mayor about having, if it is an acre, to have something above it too. So it isn't just a one-story thing. I think that's a great idea, because that will happen probably on EF and G as well, because of the shape of the site.
Yes. Yeah, EF and G will have its own challenges.
Yeah.
But let me ask you also, if somebody was, if someone came and was bringing something, you would immediately ask us to consider that. Is that correct?
That's
I think at this time, that's
process
an important thing.
yeah, when we have a serious offer, I think is when we would come to the council. Not every offer we get, but when we've got serious offers.
Right, and whether we initiate the discussion and negotiations of development agreement, so we can ask you price in executive session only. Any kind of discussion about the actual development agreement needs to occur in public. So there would probably be some initial negotiation to make sure that they're able to deliver within the parameters that you've given us. So it wouldn't just be, here's a price, you like the price, and then go negotiate. So it's not immediate, so there's sort of there's a sweet spot in there. But certainly as soon as I could.
So moving on to the Civic Center site. So this is the other one that we really want to make sure we get to this evening, and we've got about 49 minutes left. So I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time to spend on this. Same basic questions, although there's some different factors to consider here. The first question again being, do you want to maximize the sales price? Do you want to maximize public benefit, which may be more of a factor on this particular site? Do you want to maximize tax revenues over time? So, generally, what are your feelings about that for this particular site? And remember, this one is available for sale immediately. This is probably the first one that will go out on the market, I'm not sure.
We also want to talk about the boundary line adjustment.
And yes, I was just going to mention that. So
It is impacted by the contamination. The dry cleaners was on the corner, so there is still some work to do on that as well.
So you see the corner that's notched out there in the downtown core area, that's the contaminated area. In the previous design, that was designated as a plaza, basically, and that's how we addressed that. And we adjusted the boundary lines accordingly so that that would stay city-owned property, basically, for that part of the site. And related to that is, we have a split zone, but we also have the potential for a split parcel here. As you recall, some of the challenges with the hotel development had to do with the city garage and the entrance into the garage. So one option is to split this into two parcels, and we would have one. In fact, I came armed. So the City Hall driveway is roughly right in here. So we could split the parcel either along the zoning line or on either side of the driveway. And then that creates a single parcel along Bothell Way. This would probably still get factored into the design, but again, the city would retain ownership of that. And assuming that we would want to mirror to some degree the types of uses on the other side of the street, at least the ground floor retail along there. That is currently a requirement of the code, so that would still be a requirement unless the council wanted to change that. But that would allow for the development of this site separate from anything that would happen here, which could make it a little easier in terms of design and development. And then we would have to discuss, if we did that, what types of uses would you want here versus here? Some other things to keep in mind with this site is because we have public spaces next to those, we have the plaza, the upper plaza here, there could be programmed events that would occur at those. What types of uses that are going to surround that would be compatible with those uses? Would residential be appropriate? Would it lend itself better to office? Or maybe if you want a specialty grocer, maybe that goes here if the lot is large enough to accommodate that. Those are some of the questions that we would have for that. So, but back to the first question, the basic question, what's your economic objective for this site? Maximize sales price, public benefit, or revenues over time?
Can I say both?
Well, there were three of them.
Well, all of them. Well, so I'll just, lay all my cards out and then I'll let, open it up for everyone else. One quick question. Can a grocer fit on DN?
It would be an allowed use in
Think that
DN,
would fit?
but whether it would fit on,
Small Trader Joe's or something like that, or maybe, I don't know, maybe big enough to do something larger too.
Okay, so,
the footprint is there, but we did have some early interest on this site, and to provide the service access was very problematic. So we can
maybe
certainly
off
study
the
that.
alley into the park.
Yeah.
Well, that might be difficult too, going into the
There
parking
could
lot.
be some challenges. But our broker's indicating that the footprint is big enough that it could
Okay.
accommodate that.
So I've lived,
I'm sorry, I think that's a great point, because it's out of service.
wait a minute, okay,
Sometimes do it off the street.
okay. So, be a true small town.
Or the driveway.
So I've lived in Bothell long enough that we walked to the pharmacy, Paget Pharmacy, which I think used to be on this block, and we walked to the Safeway, which is now going to be the Shag Apartments. And I'm thinking, my neighbors would, I remember neighbors carrying dragging their little wheeled carts to go down to Safeway. And I'm thinking about the Shag population. I mean, we have quite a few seniors in addition to, young professionals and students, that on one of those lots, I would like to see something that would fill the need of somebody who needs groceries, someone who needs prescriptions filled, a community go into the grocery store. I'd like to see something like that. If we gave me my way, it would be on DN, because I would like to have the height down. We don't need a huge, tall, massing L shape that's going to completely put City Hall in a shadow. The plaza, I think, gives enough buffer on the west side. Are my directions right? For DC. But I would be, if I would be willing to take the financial hit of DN as far as sellability for the property, in that it would be a huge asset for the community down the road, to bring the height down to 2 or 3 stories. That makes the function of City Hall lovely. People can still see it coming in and out of downtown. And people have use, they can float in there, get what they need. So that's my feelings about DN. DC, retail, tall, best buck that you can get for it, great. That's the way I'm inclined on those 2 properties.
Would you consider additional height on Bothell Way for the DC portion of it? If, a couple of scenarios, one would be a transfer of the height from the DN property to the one along Bothell Way, or again, back to the discussion about some other public benefit like affordable housing.
How much taller does that make it than City Hall? Taller?
It could potentially make it, well, City Hall's sitting up at the highest part of the block, so I'd have to look at that a little more closely.
Yeah, I would have to negotiate that.
Because right now it can go.
I mean, I would have
6
to have some
stories.
discussion on that. Don't make me make a decision on that.
Because
Because part of that is, I would like City Hall to see the light of day, and I'm concerned that it gets so, if that were to be so tall, that end of the building would not see the light of day, but I could be wrong.
We can look at that. Right now, the height limit is the same as it is across the street, I believe,
Okay, 60,
65.
Well,
76 feet.
It's now been raised.
76
So
feet.
6 Oaks was built before we raised the height limit to 76 feet, still 6 stories. But City Hall was bumping up against that previous 65-foot height limit on the DC portion of the block. So I think the height would be relatively comparable, a little bit higher if you allowed an extra floor. But the other thing
And
is
it
that
wouldn't look visually overbearing to City Hall?
well, the plaza provides a pretty good-sized buffer,
Well,
so
that's what I'm wondering.
it wouldn't, I think there would still be plenty of light
Okay.
into the plaza and City Hall.
Okay. And just
the-
thinking about how the sun moves, summer through winter. I think you're right, the plaza gives a nice buffer there. I'm gonna,
And as far as the economic, you want all 3?
yes.
Okay,
Except for DN, some squidging room on DN.
okay.
So I had a question. That DC piece that kind of jogs over, is that air rights over our ramp? How, I'm trying to understand.
The,
Go ahead. I'm
Take
not
a
sure
shot
I
at that.
understand the question.
So the zone boundary shown in the map there is based on the old parcels. That's how it was laid out when we did the plan. So to date, when we've looked at development proposals for this block, we've applied the same split zoning rules to this parcel, and that's why in the massing diagram in the upper right, since the developable parcel is more than 60 feet away from 101st Street, we've said that you could make a case for developing the entire parcel as DC.
So the ramp into City Hall is in that 90 feet that's open?
No, it's basically right now, it's pretty close to where the line between DC and DN is.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that would be built over?
Not necessarily. That's,
That's what I'm trying to
yeah,
understand.
well,
It could be.
Yeah, it could be, yes. That was part of the proposal, I think, that we had before on the hotel.
Because
But it doesn't necessarily have to be.
to me, it makes more sense for that to be part of DN, but I'll let you guys make that decision. As far as priorities, I'm in agreement about, I love a grocery store, just amenities. But I am also remembering what we had to pay. And I am interested in, I would like to break even. However, if I had to choose it, long-term revenue is probably more important.
Well, I hate to make this comment, but I have to make this. I think we need a hotel with a conference center or an office. Either one there. I don't think that we're going to get a grocery store there. I don't think there's enough parking for it as well, but I might be wrong. But that's my impression. But I think an office space or a small boutique hotel with a conference center would be just wonderful,
On both parts of the site or just one or the other?
whichever they need.
Okay.
On this one, I think tax revenues over time is where I'd like to go. You know, you're going to get some serious offers, and you'll bring them back to us. I'm not going to, I would like to see a grocery store, there's no question about that, at some point in time in downtown. And I say that mostly because of the shag that are going in, because they're not going to be that mobile. They're my age. So, it'd be nice for them to be able to walk a block or two and get what they need to go back. And if we're building more and more office space, we need a place for some people to go get their food and their lunch. So,
I'll always be long-term revenue
Okay.
on any of these, probably. I do think matching across the street would be a good idea, keeping some sort of retail element at the street level for this place makes more sense. Above it, if it's office or apartments, I'd definitely lean towards office. I think it's just be kind of like the down, the city center, I think we call it city center, but it makes more sense to me that it's more of the, daytime population use would be a good thing to bring in. For splitting it up into two different pieces, I don't have a lot of designs on that. I mean, I know one thing we've talked about is maybe we keep the thing that's labeled DN right there and we can in the future put something else there. We don't have the money to do it now, but once we sell it, it's gone. So I would be curious to know if we maximize the development of the red part, if that would make us break even on the history we have on this site financially. That would be interesting to know.
Okay. And that's something we won't have a good sense of until we start to get some offers on the property.
Sure. Because Shag came up in senior housing and everything else, we do have a pretty serious senior population. We have right across the river, we've got the senior center. And I don't know if Shag is going to have retail that's kind of suited. You would think they've got 4 stories are they going to have retail in that building?
There's no retail as part of that
Oh, yeah.
for the Shag.
For
Yes,
Shag?
there's, the Bothell Way frontage is required retail. What I've heard to date is that it's going to be, the Seattle Electric Bike Shop is going to move there. There was a bank in the base, and there was I've heard an interest from a optometrist that also sold eyewear as uses, and I think there may be one other space that's in that frontage.
I thought we had exempted that. Is that just on the Main Street side?
It's not required, and they won't have retail on the Main Street side. That's where they'll have their community spaces. But the Bothell Way side, the Multi-Way Boulevard side, will have ground floor retail.
It just seems historically Bothell's been kind of the place for the senior activities and senior citizens to, they come here for the center, and we provide those services for the adjoining cities, and so having, I don't know, some sort of place for them to shop and get the things that, like a wheelchair and walker store. I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here, but like stuff. What? Or
These are
pharmacy.
active seniors like Lou Pinelli. Fine.
All right, I'll shut up now.
Senior fitness centers. Those are actually very popular.
They have one in there, don't they? Shag?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like the retail on the bottom of the Bothell Way side. Maybe like one of the new Amazon Go stores. Those are pretty compact. And then, yeah, maximizing the height on it to just get the sales price. That'd be good. Like the mayor was saying, try and recoup as much as we could out of that parcel. It's interesting to keep the east half for later development, for more community-minded. That'd be pretty interesting. So I'll stick with those.
And splitting the parcel into 2 does give the council the option of not making a decision right now on the eastern portion of it. So that's one possibility there if you wanted to do that. If you want to. No decisions, this is just direction tonight, so.
I'll weigh in. I would split it, for sure. I personally would love to put a community center on DN at some point. I hear about it all the time. People want one. I'm just concerned about finances. So, yeah, if we could, if by some miracle we could recoup on DC and reserve DN, I'd be really happy. temporary dog park or community garden there while we figure it out. Not off leash.
That is one of the trade-offs, is the economic, the financial aspects of that.
Well, I'm going to say maximum tax revenue on ongoing, because I think that that's a very prime piece of property. And while I'd love to have a civic center there, I think if we get a good offer, a good strong offer on the two pieces, DC and DN, you should bring that to us. And we should make some consideration at that point.
Okay, thank you. Any other, we talked on D, I know design was very important. Any thoughts on any particular requirements here that, that you would want to put on the property or not put on the property?
I just want it to match with across the street. Matching with City Hall. I mean, if it's big enough and it'll cover it so you can just see the top floor, I think we're okay. I'm more so from the look and feel of it from the boulevard. I'd want it to match what's going on across the street.
Okay. By match, you mean that type of design, not an exact match?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Or particular types of uses that you would not want?
Nothing that adds to contamination.
Yes, exactly.
No more dry cleaners on that lot.
So I do have a question. So how big is that site where you have the chest now? Isn't that where we thought of having kind of a small park, plaza? Is that correct?
You're talking about the corner, the
Yeah.
notch on the corner?
I think the chessboard would fit in that comfortably. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do too. I think that something like that in that site would be really important.
Could probably even do bigger pieces, because I think it's a little bit bigger than what's shown there. Okay, anything else on this site? Was there anything else on this one you wanted to talk about?
So that comment makes me wonder, are you okay with expanding the boundary line adjustment so we would no longer have a plaza on the corner? Or are you still interested in having a plaza? Because the last negotiation we had, we were paying 50% of the cost of a plaza. So that's another financial contribution on the part of the city. So we'd have to build it, pay for it, maintain it. Or are you okay extending the boundary line edge to edge and seeing what's proposed as a development?
I think we've got a whole lot of plaza on this block that the city owns. So we don't need that one, in my opinion.
I guess I misunderstood. I thought we needed to keep it because it was contaminated.
Well, we're cleaning it up.
Okay, so
so it
it
would-
will be
it-
available for sale.
There'll be some monitoring wells, so there'll be some, just like on D, there'll be certain places that the developer will have to work around, but we intend to clean it up.
Oh, okay. I'm fine with selling it. We could put the chessboard on the City Hall Plaza.
There you go.
I mean, there's lots of space there.
I think I started out saying that the city would retain ownership of that, so I apologize.
no,
I think I
it's-
gave some,
We could,
but we don't have to, so
Right.
because the contamination would be,
because I think
point,
for
right.
value purposes, and Blair would be a better expert on this, I would think that the corner of that parcel would be valuable for whomever's going to buy it.
yeah, that's the visible corner.
One last piece too about splitting it. I think that was part of what kind of we ran into before. I think splitting it's a good thing because getting somebody that's going to do this whole big L-shaped thing is kind of probably limits who could actually do it. And so having two separate things, I think, is something we should definitely look at entertaining.
Okay. Great. Thank you. So we've got a little time left. Whoops. Did I go too far? Oh, that's right. We didn't have one for A. So, let me go the right way. So let's talk briefly about A down here. We didn't put together a fact sheet on that. I think we're all pretty familiar with what information we have on that site. It's not affected by contamination, as far as we know, and it has some restrictions in terms of access in and out of the site because of the highway, but otherwise, it's probably one of the first ones that would go out for sale. Any particular questions, restrictions, thoughts on what you'd like to see or not see here? And again, basic question, what's your economic objective here? Maximize price? Maximize tax revenues over time? Yes to all the above?
So keep in mind, this was one of the parcels we said that we would sell rather quickly to help balance the budget. So we included the revenue of the sale of this parcel as a means of balancing the 2019-2020 budget. So it's one of the first ones we want to get up on the market and get moving. Doesn't mean you can't change, and I just wanted to remind you of that. So restrictions, new ideas, limitations, reduce the value of the property.
Because right now, the direction that we're operating under is that we're just going ahead with the sale as is, basically, with the existing zoning and whatever the zoning allows or requires.
So were we conservative about the sale price that we thought we could get for it, or was it the maximum potential value?
I used the same price that it was sold for before 3-4 years ago. So we're probably back. It went up from the point that we sold it. It fell out of escrow. It was probably higher, a little bit higher. And we're sort of, things are softening a little bit. It is a challenging parcel. So it's
Requires
because of-
sheet piling, right?
because of the right in, right out, because the piling, it's sort of an odd shape, but it's a beautiful parcel. I mean, it backs the river, and so it has some real potential. And with the bus rapid transit coming and a park and ride downtown, I mean, it still has some real potential.
I'm still where I'm at with all the rest. Maximize the long term.
And I would agree we need to do that now. Now.
So
So maximize the sales price?
he's saying maximize the long term. You're saying sell it now. Those are two different.
Those are two different things.
Okay.
Only concerns that I have with that is covered by the code as far as, access and protecting the rivers. So I trust good judgment in making the right connection for that piece of property in a way that benefits the city.
Would you want any public benefits? Again, if we're talking about affordable housing, for example, if there were housing put on this, I'm not sure if housing would be ideal on this site, but given its configuration, there's a little more flexibility
Was that
typically
not
with.
part of our discussion? Was that piece pulled out when we just did the,
The recent rezones?
yeah,
This was not part of that.
that wasn't part of it?
Yeah, it's already part of this is the SR 522 zoning at that site.
Right.
Okay.
So it's the same zoning as the other side, but we didn't increase the zoning here, so we couldn't put the housing requirement on it.
That's a great question, and I have no problems with putting that same affordable housing component.
We'd have to increase the capacity, or because we own it, we could make that, we wouldn't have to increase the capacity, we could make that a requirement, but again, it would lower the price of the property.
Only if it lowered to the break-even point.
Okay. Okay.
Can I ask, what's the current zoning? I can't find it in here.
It's SR 522 zoning.
But, sorry, height, what's the current height? Or are there height restrictions on it?
It's 4 stories and 45 feet.
Okay. Does staff have any recommendations on changing that to make it more attractive for sale, or?
There are some view corridor restrictions. It is in the riverfront overlay. The previous development proposal we had for that site, I don't believe even maxed out the height because it is such a oddly configured site. They could only fit parking for, I think, 3 stories of development. I'd have to go double back on that. So I don't know that increasing the height above the current 4 stories would necessarily get us anything.
I seem to recall that the last time around, the developer was asking for access through the landing, and I would say I don't have any interest in expanding the area of Block A into the park in any way, in case that comes up.
I think that's been precluded by the daylighting of Horse Creek. Before that time, we were looking at the possibility of access. The one access issue that the previous developer did explore was adding a 4th leg to the 180th intersection to provide access directly into the site. That may or may not be doable. They would need to get permission from WashDOT to do that, but otherwise it's going to be right in, right out only.
Other thoughts on A?
Sell it.
Yeah, I think expedient sales, maximizing the sale price just seems constrained and doesn't seem like the long-term revenue is as likely there, but get the most we can for it right now. Get the long-term in the other blocks.
Okay. Is that everybody? All right. We're making good progress. If I can just remember which direction I need to go with this. That's not the one. So we've got about 20 minutes left. Yes.
Was I here?
I thought so. Not as much, because it was more about D, but they apply in both. So for P South, this one again, because of the contamination, if you look at the fact sheet, we don't know yet when this one might be available for sale. There are several other issues going on with the property right now, so this would be a longer-term item. But in terms of the future development of the site, what would be the council's goal there? Would you want to maximize sales price of that, or the long-term revenues, or some public benefit there? Because this one's a little different in terms of where it's situated. The context is different than the other ones that we've talked about. It's not directly on the multi-way boulevard, so it doesn't have the same requirements from that standpoint. It's a little oddly shaped, but it's also a fairly good sized piece of property, a little over 1.5 acres. It's got a relationship to Popkini Way and the stadium and the other development that's happening back there right now, which is where quite a bit of the development activity in downtown is going on. So thoughts in terms of the economic factor here?
You can go.
I'd like to maximize long-term revenue on this piece of property.
I'm always there, but this one for public benefit, I know there's been talk about another parking garage potentially, like Sound Transit's looking for a lot and that type of thing, and I wouldn't be opposed to it being here.
And the current, at least, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Aaron, but the current thinking of Sound Transit is a different site from this. They're looking at something in conjunction with Popkini Stadium.
Okay.
So that's not to say this couldn't still be considered in the future if that one doesn't work out for some reason. But right now, they're not looking at it for that purpose.
Okay. Well, then I'd probably lean towards, well, this one's, yeah, it's just surrounded by retail. I mean, I'm sorry, housing.
Yeah, you've got a little bit of retail on the backside of the junction across Popkini Way from this, but it is predominantly residential. And there's also an office component to the POP project that's just to the north of it.
Okay.
But it's a fairly small portion of that. Is there any commercial in Phase 2, or is that all residential for the POP?
I think it's most likely going to be all residential, phase 2 of the POP.
So residential, is that code for maximum, or should I say maximum sale price? Because residential probably gets the best.
You're not going to get a lot of long-term revenue from
Right.
residential.
All right, for this one, I'll just say maximum sale price then. I think it should be residential, if it's not a parking garage.
I think office would be something that might give you the long-term tax revenue.
It could, yes.
So I think it should be in the mix as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Just for context, the property immediately south of P South is in for, they haven't submitted permits, but they've had a pre-application for office development by the same developer that's doing the housing on the next lot to the south, the one north of the library. Harbor Homes.
I don't know, I would think, it seems like office or residential are two suitable options. Just feels appropriate for that location.
Okay. Office or residential?
Or a movie theater. Sorry, I have to
No,
say it.
that's another
It's
option.
right in the middle of a bunch of houses. It's perfect. I would say, given that it's probably not going to be anything other than residential or office, I still think long-term economic benefit was the most important. It's less of an issue on this lot for me, though, so I'm flexible.
Okay.
It sounds like we don't know. It sounds like we're wide open.
Well, this was a little farther out, so
Yeah.
it's, it's a little fuzzier in terms of what might happen there as well. By the time this one's ready for development, the market will likely have changed. We'll have more development that will have occurred around there, and we can have some more discussion at that time.
Let's do
But
that.
Since you're here, sort of had a captive audience, so
Right.
take advantage of the time while we can.
Well, I don't really want to stay till 10 on the nose. I don't know about everybody else. Unless you-
I think we've covered quite a bit.
Oh, we
so,
covered it? Okay.
Really appreciate the time and your comments, the feedback. It's very helpful. I think it will give us some things to do. And one assignment I heard out of, that I heard out of this was to do some type of a visual preference workshop with you in the future in terms of the design of the gateway parcels. So,
Would that just be with council members weighing in on it, or would that be something where, because sometimes you can have it where the audience can also vote, remotely on their phones or whatever, just pack this thing and put pictures up.
You want to name Wayne Golf Course again?
Yeah, right? Oh, remember that.
But I would suggest perhaps the Landmark Board be involved, or the Planning Commission. We have some architects that I think might have valuable opinions, so just a thought.
okay, we'll think about that. And part, E, F, and G is actually in the special design review area, I believe.
It
Is
is.
it not? So anything there would go to the Landmark Board as well. D would not, but E, F, G would. So, okay, did you want to say anything else?
You got what you need? Okay. You good? Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn? I can't make a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Dipner, seconded by everybody to adjourn. We're adjourned. Oh, wait, didn't vote. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Now we're adjourned.
Thank you all.